My name is Alexandra Levy with the Atomic Heritage Foundation, and we're here on December 27th with Kenneth Pumphrey in Florida. My first question is to please say your name and to spell it.
My name is Kenneth Pumphrey, and I'm 86 years old. My name is spelled Kenneth, Kenneth, Pumphrey.
Great. Can you tell me about where and when were you born?
I was born in the town of Tacoma Park, Maryland, just about 50 feet from the Washington, D.C. line on Eastern Avenue. And that was in 1927. As for the exact address, I don't know. In those days, I didn't have a whole lot of numbers on some of the houses. They were nice homes, but didn't have a whole lot of addresses. And it was not a heavily populated area anyhow. But in the interim, I'll say that 30% of the people were relatives in the town of Tacoma. So most people knew pretty much about me and my family. Now, if there's any questions on that,
What kind of an education did you receive?
my education consisted of starting out in the D.C. schools and transferring to the Maryland schools. And I went to a little school, J. Enos Ray School, in the elementary area, and Mount Rainier High School for my high school education. And that's as far as I went with my education until I got out to service. And then I went to Columbia Technical Institute in Washington, D.C. to take mechanical engineering. But I found out they had a lot of things going on that were improper, and I didn't feel completely satisfied. So I didn't go back the second year. I wanted to go to the University of Maryland, but even at that time, the universities were still pretty crowded with ex-military people coming back on a GI Bill and going back to college. So the waiting list was pretty long, and I figured I'd be a little bit too old to go to college at that time. So from there I went into a mechanical trade and steam fitting, which is pipe work for powerhouses, private homes, and heating and air conditioning, refrigeration systems. Now, most of my work was in Washington, D.C., and 90% of it was around government buildings or in government buildings or government territory, government areas. So I saw quite a bit in Washington. When I went to Los Alamos in 1946, just after I graduated, and I was there until 1948. And then I was discharged from Sandia Base in Albuquerque because we closed Los Alamos out to the military. And I was one, I think, of the last 12 military personnel to leave there with a security guard. We turned it over to the civilian guards.
So how did you end up working in the SED at Los Alamos?
What it amounted to, we had finished our basic training in Camp Lee, Virginia. And they routed up a group of men, and I didn't know any of them to amount to anything, because we weren't all from the same companies. And this colonel got up in front of us on a stage Now, I may be wrong, but I think it could have been Colonel Lansdowne who eventually ended up as my neighbor where my wife and I moved in the Deal area of Maryland. Anyhow, but I can't back that up, but I think it was because that was part of his job. He got up on a little stage and gave us a speech about what a great place it was, and we were specially selected due to our background to serve where he was going to take us. And he said, now this is a top secret project. He said, but you gentlemen are going to enjoy this. He said, you'll be able to reach out the window and pick fruit off the trees. He said, we've got educational things for you. He said, and entertainment. He said, and you're going to be very well satisfied. He said, so if you are interested, he said, now I know a lot of people in the military, a lot of people tell you the military do not volunteer for anything. They did. He said, but I'm asking you to volunteer for this. He said, now, if you are interested in this, he said, sign up with the sergeant out there. He said, and he will hand me the papers. He said, we'll make arrangements for your transportation. So consequently, I talked it over with a couple of fellows, and I said, well, curiosity's got the best of me. I said, no, I don't think this is going to be what he's promising. I said, because I haven't seen it here in Camp Lee. I said, but I'm going to take a chance. I said, he says, he told us we would not be going overseas. I said, but he said we're not going overseas, and I said, I don't know whether they'd send me to Germany or Japan. I said, but I wouldn't be interested in going to the Far East. I said, so I'm going to give this a try. I'm young, 18 years old, got all kinds of funny ideas, I guess. But anyhow, I decided I was going to sign that paper and give it a try. Consequently, we were transferred from our barracks at Camp Lee, Virginia, to the railroad station in Richmond, where we were put on a train which had 3 military cars. And these consisted of a dining car, a sleeping car, and another car, sort of a Pullman. And these 3 cars were hooked to other trains that were moving in a westerly direction. If they went southwest, they would hook us onto that train. Then we may be detached from that train and go northwest to up towards Illinois. And our first real stop was in El Reno, Oklahoma. And every man on that train was broke. We hadn't received our pay from Camp Lee, naturally. And we hit a restaurant there, and the man said, well, he said, I'll help you fellows as much as I can. He says, I'll see what we can do. So this lieutenant that was in charge of us on this train convinced him to let him sign a check for this and get our names on it, and the government would reimburse us and him. We were a long time getting that money. So consequently, our next stop was in a town outside of Albuquerque. I'm trying to think of the name of it.
Was it Lammy?
It sounds like Tucumcari, or it wasn't that. It was another town. It was a train went in there. Anyhow, they hooked us to another engine, and this engine backed onto us, not forward. I mean forward, not backwards, and pushed us up and out of the station. And we traveled for quite a while. I don't know how many hours, because we weren't moving fast. And I couldn't understand. It was just 3 cars, just our cars, with this one engine. And we were going backwards, and I couldn't understand why. Well, we finally got into Santa Fe, and we knew where we were because there was a sign up there that said Santa Fe. And there were people standing out there, and some of them had children, and they were looking at this train. So we got all our baggage off and stood on the platform for a while, and some 6x6s were there to take us up to camp. We didn't know where we were going. And I asked this one lady, I said, did you always have people come here to watch a train go? She said, oh no, she said, my children have never seen a train. She said, trains don't come in here anymore. So that was a surprise too. Here's the capital of New Mexico, and I knew that much. And a railroad track with a station, but the trains didn't go in there. So we finally ended up in Los Alamos, and we had a lot of orientation, and we were told what we could and couldn't do, and about the secrecy end of it, and we were assigned our particular barracks. Now, I'm going to let you take the questions from there, because I was in Company A, and what they classified as the 8455th Military Police Battalion.
Was that part of the Special Engineer Detachment?
No, it was, yes and it was. It was and it wasn't. It was a funny setup because the engineers that were in Los Alamos weren't the engineers like we would expect to see if we were in combat or in a military camp. And some of them did have the compound for the vehicles. And then some seemed to work with the civilian end of it. And some that we saw would never speak to us. And we were told not to molest them, not to get out of line with them. And we just got the impression that they weren't full military because they never saluted their officers when they went by. And the officers didn't stop to upbraid them, to tell them what they were supposed to do.
So what was your job at Los Alamos?
Strictly a guard security system. In other words, we took our orders no matter what post we were on, and we put 6 on and 6 off. In other words, we worked for 6 hours, we'd be off for 6 hours. And we very seldom got the same guard twice. In other words, I would be at Site 10E, TD site. I don't know whether you know anything about these or not, but tech site, we didn't know where we would be. We might be guarding a coal bunker, or the ammo dump, anything. And post 1, the gate. I pulled that twice. But you never knew where you were going to be on guard.
Did you ever do guard on horseback or in a car?
No. They claimed before we got there some of the guards were on horseback. And as a matter of fact, just before we broke the camp up and left, they sent 2 half-tracks up there, and one of them I was put in charge of. And we had to get a lot of cosmoline off of them because they would have been sort of sandbagged, I guess. But anyhow, I got them cleaned up, and there were 6 men with me. And that was our transportation. We had to learn how to handle our own selves. There was nobody to teach us. But I was responsible for that half-track. And of course, I had never driven one before. I had driven 6x6s and Jeeps and weapons carriers, but never anything as big as a half track. So anyhow, I turned that in, and that's when we closed the camp up, and all of us moved out. We were shipped to Sandia. And when we got to Sandia, a small group of us were transferred to a camp outside of Camp Hood, Texas. And it was a high security area. And we went there as part of the security system. But we were only there about maybe a month, and then we were transferred back to Sandia for our discharge. Now, as for Los Alamos, our barracks were rather archaic. They were pressure-treated, like not particle board, but the composition board, and it was sort of pressure. It wasn't pressurized. It was treated with a tar surface and 2x4 structure. And I've got a couple of cartoons there to show you what the heating system was. And there were 3 coal stoves to each barracks. And we had a nice latrine between 2 barracks. There was a connection, barrack here and a barrack there, and the latrine was in the middle. And they were in very fine shape. And the mess hall wasn't too far from our barracks. But the first Thanksgiving, we got there just before Thanksgiving. When we got off that train, we got to Los Alamos. And a couple days later was Thanksgiving, and the cooks had a royal party. And somehow they got into some booze. And they cooked the turkeys, but they forgot to take the entrails out. And there was a lot of diarrhea the next day. And I don't know, they never seemed to do a whole lot of damage to the cooks when they were punishing them. You know, they had their own barracks and their own way of living there. And they were sort of royalty because they needed cooks for the men anyhow. So we accepted that.
Besides that incident, was the food generally okay?
The food was fine. The food was good. Normally, every once in a while you get something maybe a little bit out of water, or maybe you didn't like it, but the rest of the men would go along with it. And we found no fault with our food whatsoever. But the officers' mess was attached to the mess hall, and they had their own place to eat. Of course, they had to pay for it. And they had a different type of silverware and a different type of plates. We had the regular steel plates, you know, with the sections. But we didn't complain about that. I mean, that was part of the system. And my initials were KP, KMP, and I lived up to my initials. I saw some KP, quite a bit, and some military police, you know, so it was just a matter-of-fact thing.
Were there any security breaches when you were there?
No, not that I heard of, really. In other words, security was pretty tight. Even the security was tight on us. And they kept telling us, we got the Articles of War, I'll say on the average of once a month. And they would tell us what we were required to do. But I made a mistake one time. I asked, well, what are the officers' Articles of War? And the sergeant was reading them off. He said, well, they do have Articles of War. I said, but I don't have them. I said, well, we'd like to find out what their standards are. We never did. You know, that's the military. But we weren't too upset about anything like that. We had our own little confines. We had our own little groups. And basically, I think everybody there just did their job and kept their mouth shut, because a lot of us, when we found out what we were working with, we were scared. We didn't take any chances. So we did what we had to do. We took care of things. And I knew my time was going to be short, so I wasn't too upset about anything.
How did you find out what Los Alamos was making?
I guess that was sort of an accident on all of our parts, because they never broadcast that. They never said, the atomic bomb is here. This is the home of the A-bomb. They said, this is the atomic energy. We're responsible for the progress of the atomic system. And that's as far as they went within reason. And then gradually word of mouth got around that there were 3 atomic bombs in a certain area, and we didn't believe it, but there were. But we think there were mock-ups, but maybe there's something ready for the future. We never questioned that. I saw things that maybe we shouldn't have seen. But we never spread it out, we never questioned it, we never said anything.
Like what sort of things that you should not have seen?
Well, maybe I shouldn't say this, but one of the things I saw was one building where you pulled a guard and you punched a clock. And when you punched this clock, you had a certain amount of time to get from this point to that point. And it showed up 1 o'clock. And when you turned your guard in and they started checking that clock report, if there was a discrepancy, then you were called aboard and questioned. Like one time on my first round, I missed 1 clock. But the rest of them turned out, the time period was right. And the captain did. He questioned me. And I told him, I said, sir, I didn't know I missed the clock. I said, I thought I caught all of them. He said, did you count them? I said, no, sir. I wasn't told to count them. I said, I was just showing where they were. I said, and approximately how much time to get from one to the other. I said, and that's what I did. You carried a key with a number on it. And this was a raised area, I guess about that high, and a floor below. And there was a whole bunch of material down there, all cut in different shapes, different sizes, with a sort of a round surface. And later on, we heard it was called yellow cake. And it looked like it was made of wax to us, we didn't know. We didn't pay attention to it. All we wanted to do is get out of that particular building and get back to our barracks. And I only pulled that particular post twice. But in the interim, we pulled about every post they had. Each individual went from post to post. You never knew where you were going until the guard roster come out.
So, as a guard, were you checking people's badges?
Yes, indeed. Even I had a badge. And it was a film badge, and what they called a TLD badge. And when you went into your guard area, you had a badge there, and you were only allowed in certain areas because your badge would be colored. A red badge could only get in this particular building. A blue badge, blue perimeter, could only go in that building. And if you had a mixture of colors, that meant you were allowed in different areas, all area badges, as they called them. So the security was very tight. Now, our military boys, our guard system, we had problems with men in uniform going in and out the gates. And our training was any time you saw an officer, you had to salute him. And we would salute this officer coming through the gate, check their badges, sometimes write their names down if it was required. But these officers, a lot of them wouldn't salute back. So we complained about it. We said, we have to live up to our end of it, but the officers don't. They said, what happens if we don't salute? They said, you can be court-martialed. So, you know, it was military. I mean, things were, I guess they were different then.
Do you remember checking the badges for any of the top scientists or anyone?
Yes, I checked people through gate number 1. Some of them couldn't speak English, but another person would be in charge, do the talking for them and vouch for them. And we'd have his badge number and his identification to make sure he was the right person that was doing this. And then they would be given papers at post 1 and some type of badge so that they could be cleared to go into wherever they were going with this individual who picked them up at the main gate. And sometimes it'd be more than one person out there that we recognized but didn't necessarily come into the main gate, building.
Did you have any relationships with any of the civilians, or did the military mostly keep to themselves?
No. We didn't fraternize. They sort of frowned on that. And I don't think the civilians are too happy with the military. But there was no friction.
What was the social life like?
Nil, next to nothing. When they finally let us get passes to go out, there was a big ruckus in Santa Fe between the military and the civilians. The boys were turned loose. And the people in Santa Fe were asking a lot of questions. Some of them already knew the answers because they had relatives up on the hill working or something, So it was secret, but it wasn't secret. As a matter of fact, we understood there was a lady there, and I read about her later on, that received all our mail. And she was the one that brought it up to Los Alamos. And her office was in Santa Fe. And that was Post Office Box 180 there.
Was it P.O. Box 1663?
No.
Or was it 180 for the military?
No, ours was Post Office Box 180.
180, okay.
Santa Fe.
Santa Fe. So that must have been a lot of mail then.
Yeah.
Did they, were they censoring mail at that point?
Well, when I went up there, they were supposed to be censoring it. But I never heard my family complain about it. My mother did mail me a camera. Simple camera, what do they call them? Pentagraph camera, where they open the top and look at it and take pictures. But I never received it. Now, I don't know whether the military got it, whether the post office lost it, or what happened to it. But I asked her she asked me how the camera, sent me a letter, asked me how the camera worked. And I asked her what camera and the return mail.
During the war, you weren't allowed to have private cameras, so it may be that
We weren't supposed to have them, no.
Yeah.
But my mother didn't know anything about that.
So they may have confiscated it then.
So they may have, I don't know. It's just another one of those things.
Did you ever get out around the Los Alamos area to do any hiking or any sports?
Yes, not sports. We one time we saw a basketball game between the basketball clowns. What are they called? They get out there and they clown around and play around, and they played the Los Alamos Bombers, and they brought them in. And that was way late after I got there. And we got our passes. We went into Santa Fe. We went into Albuquerque. A lot of times I would go down Frijoles Canyon and go around the ruins down there, the Indian ruins or the old gold mine up on the hill. And I was interested in the outside more than anything else. But I did go into Albuquerque a couple times and Santa Fe. But these were short runs. In other words, you were in Santa Fe, you were only there for a day, and then you had to come back to camp, maybe go on duty or something, you know. But for a long time, we didn't get out of camp.
Did you have any relations with the Pueblo Indians in the area?
Yes, we met a few of them, you know, in our travels in Santa Fe, and one guide down at Frijoles Canyon, and he didn't seem to be there all the time. But he explained a lot of things to the group. There was 4 of us that were down there. He explained a lot of things to us about the Indian dwellings, you know, up in the hills. And somewhere I had pictures, but I don't know what happened to them.
Did you have any contact with General Groves or Oppenheimer or any of the top people who had been on the
No,
project?
some of them passed through our guard system. But at that time, there were a lot of names that we didn't realize were being transpired. But I heard about them after I got there. And then when I got out, it finally dawned on me, I had passed some of these people through my security, not knowing who they were.
I think you had mentioned that you'd been on a basketball team and a football team.
No, I
No.
wasn't on it.
No, you weren't on it.
No,
But
no,
you-
they had one, and they were called the Los Alamos Bombers. And they were bombers, all right. They never won a game. But they tried, you know, but we didn't have any athletic directors. We had some guys that had played football maybe in college or school, and we had some that played basketball. And for those that got on the team that had never had any experience with it, it was something new. But it's something they could do. But we had a hospital up there, and it was a civilian hospital basically run by the military. And I had to go up there one time to have a cyst taken out of my earlobe because when I went on sick call, they give me some terpenhydrate and codeine and some APC pills. I don't care whether they had a toenail aching or a finger hurting or if you had diarrhea or your vision was bad. That's what you got, APC pills and a bottle of terpenhydrate and codeine. So that was a big joke.
Were the doctors there good or just
This
passing through?
one doctor, Dr. McDonald, who operated on my ear, was very thorough. And he told me I may have a little scar there. He said, and it may come back. He said, but he got it all. Because it was about that big around. It was falling up, you know, and it was giving me a lot of trouble. But the doctors that come down for sick call, there wasn't a regular doctor. It would be one doctor this time, another doctor the other time, and so forth. And this one doctor, when he was down there, he would look at this thing, and then he'd squeeze it. He'd say, it isn't ripe yet. It isn't ripe yet. So this Dr. McDonald come down there for that one morning, and he asked me, he said, what's your trouble, soldier, and so forth. And I told him. He looked at it and he said, my God, he said, why don't you have this thing taken out? And I told him what was happening, and he blew up. So he wrote the other doctor's name down. He went back to the register and got it, wrote the other doctor's name down. Mm-hmm. Then he got the name of all the technicians who were there, for the Army, the corpsmen. Anyhow, when I went up to the hospital, he and a nurse come in and got me ready for this little operation with a lot of bandages and all. And this doctor happened to come in, and they went over in the corner and had a big conversation, and he come over and showed him my ear. And I heard him tell that doctor, now I'm going to talk to you later. So, that was pretty good. I couldn't complain about that. But I was sure glad to get that thing out of my ear because it was painful. But that was another instance.
Did you get friendly with the other men you were serving with?
Yes, I did. As a matter of fact, they were all good people. Every one of them. Well, we had a few miscreants, but there were minor things like going AWOL or maybe getting inebriated or something like that, and they'd end up in the guardhouse. And I had to pull prison guard for a couple times. That was also part of the deal. In other words, everybody got his job within reason as prison chaser. And there were no real bad instances up there. None that I could see. One man stole a military vehicle and tried to get out because they wouldn't give him a pass. He wrecked it. I don't think he'd ever driven one before.
Did you ever see any explosions, any atomic explosions, or were you always just at the gate?
Yes, I don't know whether they were atomic or not, but we saw a mushroom cloud go up, and that was on the canyon on the other side of our barracks. The sirens would go off, and all of a sudden you'd hear a loud rumble, and you could feel it over where we were. Then you see this mushroom cloud go up. But, there's a lot of explosions that do that.
They were doing all kinds of...
Yeah, that was on the hill. That was at Los Alamos. That wasn't down at Socorro.
Yeah. At Sandia, were you also a guard? Did you have the same kinds of responsibilities?
No, they knew that we were Rotary, that we wouldn't be there for some reason. So we got all kinds of details, like yard pickup, KP, latrine duty, and they had their own guard system and the rest of that. And so we were just supernumerary, I guess, and they were waiting to see what was going to happen to us. So I was transferred out from there to that place in Texas, down outside of Camp Hood.
Were you still with the same group of men then?
Yeah, the men that went down to that place, yeah, but I didn't know them all until I got down there.
So the men at Los Alamos, why do you think you were selected? Was it because you had an engineering background?
No, that was what bothered me. Prior to me going up there, from what I understand from neighbors and relatives, someone or some people were going through the community and checking with relatives and friends to see what I was like. And that's another reason they thought maybe I was in trouble. And when I come up with this phony mailing address, as far as they were concerned, they figured maybe that's what it was, and they thought maybe I had really done something wrong, and it could have been the FBI or anybody checking. But they had no idea, and we didn't have a phone.
Why did they think the address was phony?
Because it wasn't a military address. In other words,
it was a P.O. box address.
Yeah, just a post office box. No 13 210 626 added to it. My name was 1310 626, And they said no. They said, Kenneth's in trouble. He's done something wrong.
Now, I think you told me that all of the men in your group had a high school degree.
Well, as far as I know, someone passed that. Some had a year of college. As a matter of fact, the Sergeant Peak in our outfit had been a school teacher.
So, but you were all pretty young, 18 to 20,
Yeah.
Early 20s?
Even he was young, but he was still a school teacher before he come into service. And we had quite a few men in there that had gone to college or some special training unit. And we had quite a few that had been in the ROTC. So that meant that they were in college. But we don't know what college.
So you were discharged in 1948.
Yes, yes.
So what did you do after your work in the military?
Well, on the GI Bill, I went to Columbia Technical Institute, and like I say, I was dissatisfied with the way they were doing things and handling things, and the way they were grading people. So I didn't go back the second year, and I went into actually, I worked for Mansville, John Mansville, as an asbestos worker. It is heating, frost, and insulation system. And then I worked for another company doing household insulation, and that was some of the same stuff, plus siding and all. And one day I just asked my dad to get me into his trade, and he wasn't too happy about it. But he said, I don't know whether you were going to stick with it or not, because I had a 5 years apprenticeship that you had to go through. That was 3 nights a week, and you didn't lose any time. If you lost any time, you were berated for it, and you were brought up before a board of directors, so they want to know why you lost time and how come. And if you didn't have a good excuse or a doctor's report, you would put out of the apprenticeship. But I went for 5 years, didn't lose any time, even when one of my children was born. And I got a decoration for the Hamilton watch with all kinds of engraving on the back, which was pretty good. And I had a good report from then on too in the trade that I worked for. In other words, I always had good jobs with good companies.
What trade was that?
I was a steam fitter, a local union steam fitter.
A steam fitter.
But I spent 15 years at Minneapolis Honeywell on the electronic and pneumatic control systems.
Did anything that you learned in the military then help you with your job later on?
Not a blooming thing.
Did you ever go back to Los Alamos?
No, I wanted to, but I never had the money or I could get the time off to go. And of course, after I got married, I was pretty well locked in. In other words, I couldn't afford to lose any time from work. And we didn't get vacations. And if you lost too much time, there's always a man waiting to take your place. So I just stayed with my trade, and I made it real good with it. In other words, I actually left Honeywell and I started working on industrial work in powerhouses and nuclear powerhouses, and even went out of town on the nuclear end. So I had a good clearance, believe it or not, by working at Los Alamos. In other words, when I worked for Honeywell, if I had a government job and I had a top secret clearance, they didn't have any trouble getting mine. They come through immediately almost. And I worked at quite a few of them, and one of the main ones was Camp David, Maryland. I worked on the control system for that. And of course, Tucson Naval Air Station, Andrews Air Force Base. Got out of name a lot of them. Just about every big government job I get on one way or the other. But I got real upset when President Eisenhower took Mr. Khrushchev up to Camp David, because he had all his henchmen with him, and of course I had photographic memories. He took them in a helicopter in broad daylight, and then put them in a car, threw them on, and took them up to the camp. And I told my wife, I said, I couldn't tell you what I was doing. I said, but that was it. So I learned to keep my mouth shut, I guess, at Los Alamos. Because you can ask her, I had several jobs where I couldn't discuss what I was doing, until it come out in the news or something. She would have a name or something, but she wouldn't know what I was doing, so. I made out pretty good.
Well, you've told some really wonderful stories. Thank you. Do you have any other interesting or funny stories you'd like to share?
No, we used to clown around a lot, and we had to do that to take the friction off of boredom. But I got pictures there where we were out clowning around in our long johns and a helmet, and you know. But the only training I really had was that I appreciated, and I don't know why, was my education in the different vehicles and how to handle them, and what to do with the military weapons and how to handle them, you know, for maintenance and repairs and field stripping and so forth. And for some reason that stuck with me for a long time. I finally got out of it. I mean, I never participated in anything, but it was just a mechanical thing. And I'm trying to think of something funny. You might get something out of some of these pictures I got out of these drawings. One of the fellows that was just 2 bunks from me was a character artist, and he had his own way of drawing his characters. And I got some of his pictures here, and portraying some of the things that happened at Los Alamos. You know, making fun of them. But we, every once in a while, our officer, Captain George W. McMahon, would finagle some money somehow or another from the military to throw a little party for the men. And it would be a beer party. The barracks were like an H shape, you know, and so you had an area in the middle too. And we'd go out and decorate that the best we could, and we'd get some good old-fashioned 3.2 beer. And all the men got happy, but the one thing to get happy about, you couldn't get drunk on it. But it was beer, you know. And that's all they served in the PXs too. They didn't serve any strong alcoholics. But we had a good PX up there, very good. There wasn't much that we couldn't get that we needed. So I don't have too many complaints. It's just, I think I was mostly bored. That was a big thing. We get some guard systems where we wouldn't see anybody. Might be night or day. And then we get guard systems where we didn't have time to really think. We were so busy taking care of a little bit of paperwork. But we were still bored.
Great. Well, thank you very much. This has been wonderful.
Well, I wish I had more to tell you. I mean, like I told you, I enjoyed getting out when I could get out, and I finally did get a hold of a camera about the last couple of months I was in there, and I got pictures of some of the territory around there and all, but no pictures of any of the buildings. I wouldn't do that because I trusted my own sanity, to be honest with you. But I like that canyon, Three Oilers Canyon I was telling you about, the Indian Pueblos and all. They weren't Pueblos, they were cliff dwellings. And I had pictures of them, and of course some of the canyons, like up by our barracks and up by the pistol range and things like that. But they're just minor interests. But that's what I enjoyed when I did get out. So I wish there was more that I could tell you, but there's not a whole lot that I can go through. I can tell you I did see those couple bombs they had there, and I don't know whether they were dummies or mock-ups or what they were, but that's what they described on television and all. But we actually had our hands on them, you know. We could go up and touch them while we were on guard, because that was part of our circulatory system. Most of the men I was familiar with were in Company A. And of course, the one I was closest to were in the A barracks, the first barracks in Company A. And these are the ones you made friends with, but you got to know the rest of them too. In other words, I know quite a few of them, but I didn't buddy around with them.
Mm-hmm.
But like I told you earlier, it's like high school or elementary school. You had your own little clique that you hung with, but you didn't stay with them all the time. I mean, you go out like quail. Today you view 3 or 4 of these guys, or 2 or 3 of them. The next day somebody else. And it was good. It was good camaraderie between the men.